All right, guys. So the lecture for today is going to cover the disorders of the blood unit. These are going to be ones on top of some of the ones we talked about during red blood cell formation. So let's go ahead and kind of jump into these real quick. So developmental aspects, real quick, of blood cell formation. We talked about these um, during hematopoiesis as well, but for the most part, early on, for kind of infants as well as kind of toddlers, the liver as well as the spleen are kind of the sites of most of our red blood cell formation. Um, Up until probably it was kind of the early 1900s, we really still thought that most people's livers and spleens produced a lot of their blood for them. It wasn't until kind of a discovery that was made that of the red marrow in bone marrow also produced red blood cells that finally kind of went by the wayside. But bone marrow then kind of takes over that process of hematopoiesis at about 7 months. But again, it can happen a little bit later in individuals as they start to produce more of that red marrow. Fetal hemoglobin really differs from hemoglobin that's produced once we get to birth, and that really has to do with the fact that the fetal hemoglobin really has to pick up the oxygen coming from the mother. Okay. A couple of the conditions that we can see with the blood system unit here are another one that we see is what's referred to as polycythemia. Obviously, poly is many. So this is a condition that has excess red blood cells or excess erythrocytes. This is really common in people that live in high elevations. And it's one of the main reasons that people who climb, say, like Mount Everest, usually end up failing because their body starts to produce all of these red blood cells at once. Their body's not able to cope with that. And then they end up usually having some sort of sickness due to that. But the main reason, again, is usually high elevation. And this is a reason why they kind of acclimatize. Okay. Other reasons that could happen is if a person has bone marrow cancer, and any kind of cancer, the bone marrow could cause an excess production of red blood cells, or some sort of tumor inside of the bone itself could also do that. And the main reason here that this is a problem is not only just because of the excess red blood cells, because that really makes the blood much thicker. And that thicker blood being pumped through the heart can lead to strain on the heart because of that. Another one that we can end up with is what's referred to as anemia. All right, so anemia is where our red blood cells really lack the ability to carry the necessary oxygen that we need, and this is usually due to low levels of iron in the blood. If you've ever donated blood before, one of the first things they do is usually do a finger prick test, and what they're checking for is the level of iron in your blood. Not enough iron, and they won't let you donate because there's no reason to give somebody else your blood if it doesn't have enough iron in it to carry enough oxygen. Um, Main way to get around this is people usually are given iron supplements or told to eat lots of leafy green vegetables that are high in iron to kind of help with this. But these are some of the symptoms that sometimes you can see with this kind of anemia. So people usually are very fatigued, again, not enough oxygen to kind of supply the system with enough nutrients. They can have weakness. They usually have kind of a pale or yellowish colored skin because, again, the red blood cells aren't holding enough oxygen. They can have an irregular heartbeat, usually an elevated heartbeat, because now the body's trying to circulate red blood cells faster to keep the level of oxygen higher. They usually have somewhat of a shortness of breath. All right, they're trying to catch their breath quite a bit. Dizziness or lightheadedness, again, is going to be associated with not enough oxygen here. They could have chest pain, again, because the heart's pumping harder. And then they usually will have cold hands and feet because the body's trying to keep some of that blood into its extremities. All right. And then obviously with dizziness, lightheadedness, they could also end up with a little bit of some headaches. Okay. Um, Other things that we can see with anemia usually is due to a couple different things. If it's not some sort of genetic problem, this is usually due to a nutritional deficiency. So they're not eating enough foods that have enough iron in them, or they could be on some sort of cancer drug. The cancer drug itself could be kind of wiping out a lot of their red blood cells and causing it kind of a depletion of that. Because obviously red blood cells are dividing pretty frequently, and that's really what kind of happens a lot of times with cancer therapies is they're going after cells that are dividing. It's also one of the reasons why people that go through like other types of cancer treatments, they lose their hair, is again because the targeting of the treatment for the cancer is going after cells that are dividing. Other ones that we can see is leukemia. Leukemia is usually a bone marrow cancer itself. But those are some of the big ones with anemia. The other one we can see is what's called pernicious anemia. Pernicious anemia is due to the lack of B12, and it's really because the body can't absorb B12. And the problem with that is B12 is necessary for healthy red blood cells, right? If you can't absorb it, you can't make them, and then we end up with low levels of red blood cells in the system. Okay. Another one that we see, and you might have seen this one in bio as well as I think I've talked about it a couple times here in anatomy. So we're looking at what's referred to as sickle cell anemia. In this case, they have abnormally shaped red blood cells. So normal red blood cells that we talked about look like kind of like these flattened discs. Sickle cell shaped ones are almost kind of just kind of little slivers of cells. The real main problem with that not only is they aren't able to carry the necessary oxygen because they don't contain enough hemoglobin, but also that deformity can cause other issues. They can get stuck in joints, and can cause clots, and they can also interfere, obviously, with oxygen delivery. The interesting thing with sickle cell anemia is this is a mutation that showed up in a certain part of the world, right? It actually showed up in and around kind of South America and the equator. And it was actually, they're finding more and more out about it every day, but it was in response to a disease that usually shows up in that part of the world, which is malaria. They found out that people with sickle cell anemia are actually immune to malaria. The virus that causes malaria is not able to attach itself to those red blood cells that have that shape to them. So it kind of is a trade off. So obviously, having these sickle cell shapes can cause a problem. But there are actually two different types of sickle cell anemia. You can have what's referred to as full blown sickle cell, which would be somebody who is homozygous recessive. So they end up with kind of the little letters if you think of your Punnett squares. And those individuals have all these sickle cell shaped red blood cells. You could also have somebody who is heterozygous for sickle cell. So they have a capital letter and a lowercase. They're going to produce some normal and some abnormal. Okay. But that's kind of the trade off there. The last one we're going to talk about real quickly then is leukemia. Again, leukemia is a bone marrow cancer. And what happens there is they end up with kind of either huge numbers of red blood cells or they have low numbers of red blood cells. And usually it's the huge number of white blood cells, and they are immature, meaning they can't function the way that they're supposed to. So they end up with all of these white blood cells, but they're not doing their job. And what that causes is the body to be really vulnerable to infection from both bacterial as well as viral. And usually people with leukemia end up dying of some sort of infection because their body just can't fight off what's going on there. And you can kind of see here in the slide, normal blood samples, we should see a few white blood cells in there, and we should see pretty much all different types. With leukemia, we usually see a lot of lots and lots of kind of immature monocytes and basophils and kind of neutrophils in there, and they just aren't doing their job with the way they're supposed to. Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and stop there. Real short today. We'll try to pick back up tomorrow with blood typing and kind of work our way through the last part of the unit here.